A Lantern, Chapter 27. The same summer that Sarah Lutz went abroad with Emma, Abby spent her spare time building the seat under the cedars. This was her 66th summer. She had almost finished her sawing and pounding on a warm August afternoon when she looked up to see Sarah driving into the lane road in her electric car. Abby's gray hair was stringing over her face, perspiration on her forehead. Sarah piloted the car, which she had dubbed Napoleon, up to the Lombardies, where Napoleon, with his usual caution, refused to climb a little rise in the ground. Sarah looked dressy. She had on a lavender summer silk, with amethysts in her ears. "Well, Sarah, you've been to London, and what did you do there?" "Abby, I frightened a little mouse under the chair." Sarah kissed Abby, held her close for a moment. What good old friends they were, and how they understood each other. "Abby Deal, whatever are you doing?" "Sarah Lutz, I do hate starting anything I can't finish, but if old Azy Drum was alive, I'd have him here on a dog trot." "But what is it?" "It's a seat." "For what?" "To sit on. I suppose you've grown so highfalutin in your travel, Sarah, that you think a seat ought to be a Louis something objet d'art, as the magazines say. Well, it isn't. It's to sit on. I've been on the go for 66 years, and now I'm going to sit down a little. And I can't think of a place I'd rather sit than here, where I can look off to the fertile fields that have come out of the old rolling prairie." "It is pleasant, Abby. There's something about it. After all my trip, the wide stretches of view, the way the rolling land meets the blue sky. Well, it calls you back. The prairie does. Just as the sea calls the fisher folk." And then Christine Reinmuller turned into the driveway, trudging along in the inevitable blue calico gathered full at the waist, her little greasy braids of hair plaited flat from ear to ear. Because she had looked so old when she was still young, Christine seemed to have changed less than the others. There was something ageless about her. As she had had no youth, now she had no age. "Well, girls, here we all are." For a long time the three girls sat under the trees and visited. Abby Deal and Sarah Lutz and Christine Reinmuller. Abby, the motherly home woman. Sarah, who loved to dress and travel. Christine, with no thought but accumulation of the land. Three varying personalities they were, held together by a strange tie of memory. Friends, because on a long ago hot summer day, three covered wagons in a long straggling line lurched over the prairie together. When John and Eloise's son Wentworth was 9, they welcomed a daughter, whom they named Laura, and whom Eloise proceeded to bring up by the ritual of a blue book, child training fads having changed, and the old red book of Wentworth's baby days having become a back number. Abby had 6 grandchildren now. Mac's sons, Stanley and Donald, were 20 and 14. Stanley, having graduated from an Omaha high school, was east at Dartmouth. And Mac and Emma were talking about sending Donald to a select school for boys. "He needs culture and poise," Emma explained to Abby. "Dear, dear," said Abby. "Culture and poise. At his age, his father needed clothing and provender." Emma laughed. That was one thing about Emma. She was like Sarah, her mother, good-natured, ready to laugh at herself as readily as another. Abby felt as close to her as to her own girls. Catherine, Mac's little daughter, was 8, an active child, always on tiptoe like some gay sprite, too full of the joy of living to settle down. Fred Baker Jr. was 22, already taking a medical course, with that characteristic following of his father which a doctor's son seems so often to possess. As for Abby's sons themselves, they progressed. Mac, who had been in the bank 27 years, was now a heavy stockholder. John did law work for half the county. The old Weeping Water Academy, closed now in 1915, its usefulness over. High schools accredited to the university were now accessible to every boy and girl. The state owned nearly 2 million acres of school land, which under the law could not be sold, and it held first place in literacy. The summer Abby was 70 was one in which the children planned an intensive campaign against her staying longer in the old home. "We've just got to take things in our own hands," they told each other. Mother's fairly well, but no woman of 70 ought to live alone like this on the edge of town." "Why hadn't she?" Abby Deal asked. "What's the difference? The edge of town or the middle of town?" They talked it over. She might have a room at John's in Cedartown. Then she would not be so far from her old friends. "If she lives with me," Eloise informed them firmly, "I shall take it upon myself to see that she gets the right balance in her meals and the right number of hours of sleep. I've always thought Mother Deal ate more protein and less carbohydrates than she should, and she gets up too early for a woman of her age." "So I'm to be brought up according to a green book, I suppose," Abby Deal said grimly to herself. "I think my home is the natural place," Margaret told them. "I'm the oldest daughter, and Mother is as interested in my oil work as I am." "We've got such a lot of room," Mac put in. "I don't know what a person wants so much for anyway, but now that we've got it, I wish Mother would come with us and help fill it up. What do you say, Em?" Good-natured Emma was willing, although she reserved certain secret doubts over the compatibility of Mother Deal and 11-year-old Catherine. Isabel's Chicago apartment was permanently out of the competition, but there remained one other plan. Grace could give up her work and come home. "I'll be willing to, Mother, if you just won't consent to leaving. I'd come right in and take charge of everything." Grace's sense of organization, like a pointer, was already scenting out a dozen little hidden plans, and her 40-horsepower energy was already tiring Abby. "I'd turn the parlor into a room for you, Mother, and take her bedroom for mine. Then I'd be down here close to her. I'd get a tea cart in case she needed a meal in her room." "And you could wheel the chickens in on the wheelbarrow for me to feed," Abby retorted. Now she ought to not have said that, she was thinking. Why, she ought to be thankful they were so kind. How many mothers could have that number of good homes at their disposal? But she did resent being planned about and talked over. After all, they were her children. In spite of their years, she was still their mother. She had never let them run over her, and she wasn't going to now. When they had quite definitely decided on Margaret's home for her, she spoke up. "I'll do nothing of the kind. I'll stay right here. And kindly let me alone, because a woman is getting old. Has she no rights?" Eloise was almost openly relieved. Emma knew in her heart that the possibility of certain dramatic situations between the rather high-strung Catherine and her grandmother were now permanently avoided. Grace admitted to herself that it would have been more of a sacrifice for her to give up her work than the others could dream, and Margaret, with a slight sinking sensation, pondered for a moment over the mental picture of the marble-top stand, the blue plush album, and the patent swinging rocker rubbing elbows with the furnishings of her artistic house. So they let her alone. But from that time on, they said among themselves that Mother was childish, that you had to overlook an elderly woman's vagaries, and that they must drive in more frequently to watch her so that no harm would come to her. When Wentworth was 13 and Laura 4, John and Eloise's third child was born. It was a boy, and they called him Millard. John telephoned the news to his mother, who was now 71. Abby hung up the receiver, put on her hat, a new one since the demise of the rusty old black with the itinerant ornament, and walked over to Cedartown. She could not wait longer to see the baby. She had borne 6 children herself, and this was her 7th grandchild. But she experienced that same excited interest over its advent than she had known all of those other times. The first thing she saw when she entered the house was a new book on child-rearing lying on the table. A brown book. "Mother, you shouldn't have done this," John was half provoked. "I would have come out to get you." "I am a little tired, I'll admit. But as long as I've got 2 good, well, we used to call them limbs, but they're legs now, so I'll say legs. I'm not going to lose the use of them if I can help it." She held the baby, to Eloise's discomfiture, for it said not to do on page 19, turned it to the light, and she saw a little of Eloise about its mouth, John in the shape of its head, something of Laura, and even, by some wild stretch of imagination, a look of its great-grandfather Deal around the eyes. Eloise, weak and nervous, was complaining about her help. The maid was cleaning and cooking all right. She did not know how to handle Laura. Immediately Abby was offering, "Let me take Laura home, Eloise. I'd like to so well. I'll take good care of her for a week or so, as long as you'll let her stay." Eloise was a little dubious about the proposition and took no pains to hide it. "What do you think, John?" "I'm wondering if Mother ought to. She's 71, Eloise." "Oh, it's not your mother I'm thinking of." No, it would not be of her mother-in-law that Eloise would be thinking. "Well, you folks decide." Abby slipped out into the other room. But Eloise was one of those quaint souls who think that because a woman is old, she is also deaf, and her voice carried very clearly to Abby. "It's Laura herself I'm thinking about. You know yourself, John, that your mother is terribly old-fashioned, and I don't know just whether to, trust Laura with her that long. She thinks everyone ought to drink sassafras tea in the spring. She would still use goose grease on a child's neck for colds and wrap a flannel around it." Abby heard John's low chuckle. "And do you know what I heard her say?" She was earnest and serious. "She actually said, John, that a red flannel was better." John laughed out loud. "Oh, Eloise, you never did quite understand Mother. That was a joke." "Well, I must say I can't always tell when she's joking then." But between the devil, rather mildly represented by the maid, and the deep blue sea, quite definitely represented by her mother-in-law's out-of-date notions about children, Eloise chose what seemed the lesser of the two evils and packed Laura home with her grandmother. Abby and the maid and John picked out the things which the triumvirate thought Laura would need during the stay, materially assisted by the traveler herself, who put in a few choice articles in the way of a one-eyed doll, some red beads in a bottle, and a tooth of her dog which had been presented to her by the veterinarian and which had escaped the sanitary eye of her mother. John drove out home with them, let them out under the Lombardy poplars, and took the little bag up to the screened-in porch. And if Eloise could have known the supreme faith and confidence with which her husband was looking upon the situation, she would have been attacked by the little green god of jealousy. Abby led Laura by the hand up the steps of the porch. It was not possible to say which was looking forward to the visit more, the guest or the hostess. For Abby, with Laura's little warm hand in hers, was happy almost to the point of excitement. No, Abby Deal would never get over being a mother. "We'll gather the eggs first." Abby's voice held all the notes of interest which an anticipated journey might have brought forth. "And feed the chickens, and then we'll have a little supper." "What will we have, Grandma?" "Oh, we'll have, what would you like? Nice fresh eggs boiled in Grandma's new little kettle, or some cream toast, or baked potatoes. Mother doesn't let me eat potatoes at night." "Oh, I see. That's all right. We'll do as Mother wishes." "What are you smiling at, Grandma?" "I guess I was just smiling to think how nice it is that you have so many good things to choose from for your meals. You see, when my children were little, it was so hard to get enough food for them that anything agreed with them." They gathered the eggs. "In the very same pail your papa used to gather them," Abby told Laura, and the child gazed with awe at the antique which had been saved from an age that seemed as remote to her as the one in which Noah's Ark figured. They fed and watered the chickens. "And see, every time they take a drink, they look up and thank God for it," said Abby Deal, with a fine disregard for natural science and a sublime faith in her fowl's morale. They ate supper. "And now you'll wipe the dishes when Grandma washes them." With Laura excited beyond measure at the unusual confidence placed upon her close associations with chinaware. Afterward, they went out on the porch, and Abby held the little girl on her lap. She cuddled her up and put her wrinkled cheek against the child's firm one. Oh, why didn't mothers do it more when they had the chance? What were clubs and social affairs and freedom by comparison? And what was freedom? "Tell a story now, Grandma." "A fairy one or a real one?" "A real one when you were a little girl." "Well, when I was a little girl," Laura wiggled with contentment. "When I was a little girl, I had a doll, and you'd never guess what she was made out of." "No, what was it made out of, Grandma?" "A stone, and it had a little round stone head." Yes, Abby Deal was contented as countless mothers in a rather topsy-turvy world are still contented.